I met him on a spring evening in Chicago. He looked confident, charming, and full of life. From the moment he smiled at me, I felt something shift inside. I thought he was the kind of man every woman dreams of, stable, funny, protective. I was wrong, but I didn't know that yet. We started dating, and it felt like everything in life was finally falling into place. He brought me flowers, called me every night, and always said the right things. I was 28, and I thought I had found my forever. When he held my hand, I believed I was safe. When he said, "You're the only woman I'll ever love," I believed that too. 2 years later, he proposed. It was simple, no big crowd, no fancy setup, just him and me at the cafe where we first met. He said, "You make me want to be a better man." I said yes without hesitation. My friends cried happy tears, and my parents were proud. I thought I was the luckiest woman alive. Our wedding was beautiful. Everyone said we were the perfect couple. For the first few months, it actually felt true. We spent evenings watching movies, cooking dinner, talking about the future. He told me he wanted 2 kids, a house by the lake, and a life full of laughter. I wanted that too. I wanted us. But slowly, things began to change. It didn't happen all at once. It came like quiet waves, one after another. At first, he would make small comments, harmless on the surface. If I went out with friends, he would say, "You seem happier with them than with me." I would feel guilty and cancel plans. He smiled, kissed me, and said, "See. You don't need anyone else." I thought it was love. It was control. Then came the money questions. He asked why I spent so much on small things, coffee, groceries, clothes. I laughed it off, thinking he was just being practical. But soon, every purchase became a conversation, and every conversation turned into an argument. I started feeling like a child asking for permission. I was working part-time at that point, and I loved my job. It gave me purpose. But one morning, he said, "You don't have to work anymore. I'll take care of you." It sounded like love again, like protection. So I quit. That was the first step toward losing myself. Once I stopped working, everything changed. He began asking about every dollar I spent. He wanted to see receipts. If I forgot, he'd get cold, distant, and angry. One night, I asked him for money for something personal. He looked straight at me and said, "You'll have to beg me even for tampon money. Forget about your credit cards." Then he laughed, like it was a joke. I laughed too, just to keep the peace, but inside, something cracked. After that, he took my credit cards, for safekeeping. He said he'd manage the finances better. I didn't realize he had just cut off my independence. Every time I wanted something, even a small thing like a shampoo or coffee, I had to ask him. Sometimes he gave it, sometimes he didn't. He decided what was necessary and what wasn't. He decided everything. He didn't hit me. He didn't scream. But he controlled me in every other way. He wanted to know who I talked to, what I wore, what I thought. When my friends invited me out, he'd say, "Why do you need to go? I thought I was enough for you." Slowly, my world shrank until it was just him. I started lying to myself. I told myself it was love, that he just cared too much. But deep down, I knew. I could feel it. I was trapped. I cried quietly at night so he wouldn't hear. Then, in the morning, I smiled and made breakfast like nothing had happened. Because that's what women do when they're breaking inside, they pretend. That's how it was for the first year. I stopped seeing my family as often. My friends drifted away. My world became smaller, darker, quieter. He was the center of it all, and I revolved around him like a planet around the sun. I thought that was love. But love shouldn't make you smaller. It shouldn't make you disappear. I didn't realize it then, but the dream I had built, the dream of a perfect marriage, of forever love, was already falling apart. It just hadn't hit the ground yet. After the first year of marriage, things weren't the same. The man who once called me beautiful every morning now barely looked at me. His voice, once warm, became cold, sharp, and calculating. I kept telling myself it was stress, that maybe work was getting to him. But the truth was, it wasn't stress. It was power. And he was enjoying it. He started controlling everything, the groceries, the bills, my phone, even what I wore. If I bought something without asking, he would find out and make me feel guilty for it. One evening, he said, "You waste money like a child who doesn't understand responsibility." I stood there in silence, holding back tears. I wanted to scream, but instead, I apologized. It became a routine. I made mistakes. He punished me with silence. Then I apologized for upsetting him. He would forgive me with a hug, and for a few hours, everything felt normal again. That cycle repeated so many times that I stopped noticing how wrong it was. He didn't just control money, he controlled time. I had to tell him where I was, who I met, and how long I stayed there. Once, when I was 5 minutes late from the grocery store, he accused me of meeting someone. He said, "Don't lie to me. I know when you're hiding something." There was nothing to hide, but his anger made me believe that somehow I had done something wrong. He began to isolate me from everyone. He told me my family was too interfering. He said my mother didn't respect him. So, I stopped visiting her. He said my friends were bad influences. I stopped talking to them too. Slowly, my phone became silent, my life empty. The only voice left was his. He wanted my attention, my obedience, my silence. And I gave it all to him, because I thought that's what love meant. I thought if I became perfect, he would love me again. But perfection never came. He always found something wrong. The dinner was too salty, my dress too tight, my laugh too loud. Every argument ended the same way. He would twist my words until I didn't even know what I was apologizing for. He had a talent for making me feel guilty about things I hadn't done. If I cried, he called me dramatic. If I stayed quiet, he called me cold. No matter what I did, I lost. He had a way of saying things that sounded caring but carried poison underneath. Like, "You're lucky I'm patient with you," or, "No one else would put up with your moods." I started believing him. I started thinking maybe I was difficult, maybe I didn't deserve more. That's how control works. It doesn't break you suddenly, it convinces you that you're already broken. At some point, I stopped recognizing myself. I looked in the mirror and saw a stranger, tired eyes, fake smiles, and fear hidden behind every word. I couldn't remember the last time I had laughed freely. My life became a series of steps designed to keep him calm. Every move was calculated. Every word was measured. Then came the night that changed everything. We were having dinner, and I accidentally spilled water on the table. Just water. But his reaction was instant. He slammed his hand on the table, and the sound echoed through the kitchen. "Can't you do anything right?" he shouted. I froze. I wanted to say it was just an accident, but my throat closed. He stood up, looked at me with disgust, and said, "You're useless." That word, useless, stayed in my head like a wound that wouldn't heal. He went to bed that night without saying another word. I sat at the table for hours, staring at the empty glass, trying to figure out how love had turned into this. I kept thinking, maybe tomorrow he'll be kind again. But tomorrow came, and nothing changed. After that night, I stopped talking much. Silence became my shield. If I didn't speak, I couldn't say the wrong thing. If I didn't ask, I couldn't be denied. I moved through the house like a shadow, cooking, cleaning, pretending everything was fine. To outsiders, we were the perfect couple. But inside, I was fading. He made me believe that every decision I made was a mistake, that every thought I had was wrong. He would check my phone when I slept. He would question me about every call, every message. I started deleting everything, even harmless texts, just to avoid the interrogation. I lived in fear, not of being hit, but of being blamed. That's the kind of abuse no one sees. The kind that doesn't leave bruises but leaves scars all the same. The kind that makes you question your sanity. I stopped dreaming. I stopped hoping. I was living, but I wasn't alive. And still, every night before bed, I told myself, maybe he'll change. Maybe he'll love me again. That thought kept me going, the hope that someday, the man I married would come back. But deep down, I knew he was gone. The only thing left was his control, and it was tightening around me like a rope I couldn't break. Time passed slowly after that night. Days blurred into weeks, weeks into months. I lost track of dates because every day felt the same, walking on eggshells, afraid of saying the wrong thing, afraid of the silence that came after. My world had become a loop of apologies and self-blame. He didn't need to shout anymore. I already knew what he wanted. One look was enough to make me stop talking, to make me change what I was wearing, to make me disappear into the version of me he liked, quiet, small, and obedient. He had trained me without me realizing it. Every act of kindness from him felt like a reward I had to earn, not something I deserved. When he smiled, I felt relief, not joy. When he ignored me, I panicked. Love had turned into fear, and fear had become normal. I stopped calling my mother. Every time she asked, "Are you okay?" I lied. I said, "Yes, Mom, everything's fine." Because how could I explain that I didn't even know what fine meant anymore? I remember one evening, the sky outside was dark, the kind of gray that feels heavy. I was sitting alone, folding laundry, when I realized I hadn't laughed in months. Not a single real laugh. I tried to remember the sound of my own voice when I was happy, but it felt like a dream from another life. He came home that night, dropped his jacket on the couch, and complained about dinner before even tasting it. I said nothing. He looked at me with that familiar expression, the one that said, "You're nothing without me." Later that week, I found a message on my phone from my friend Lily, the same friend I hadn't seen in over a year. She wrote, "I miss you. Are you okay?" I stared at that message for a long time. My hands were shaking. It felt like someone had reached into the cage I was living in and opened the door, even if just a little. But before I could reply, I heard his footsteps. I deleted the message. That's how fear works, it teaches you to destroy your own chances of freedom. The next few days were worse. He started keeping a closer eye on me, asking where I was every minute, accusing me of things that never happened. I remember him saying, "You think I don't notice your attitude lately? You're lucky I even tolerate it." Something inside me started to break that day. Not loudly, quietly, like glass cracking under pressure. I realized I had become invisible, even to myself. I wasn't living a marriage anymore, I was surviving a sentence. One night, while he was asleep, I walked to the mirror in the bathroom. The light was dim. I looked at my reflection, pale skin, tired eyes, lips that hadn't smiled in so long they looked foreign. I whispered to myself, "Who are you?" And I didn't have an answer. I sat on the floor, hugging my knees, tears running down silently. I didn't cry for him or what he had done. I cried because I couldn't recognize myself anymore. That was the first real breaking point. Not a scream, not a fight, just a quiet realization that the woman I once was had disappeared completely. But something else was born that night, a small, fragile thought. It said, "You can't live like this forever." It wasn't courage yet. It was survival instinct. The part of me that refused to die was waking up. The next morning, I made him breakfast as usual. I smiled, nodded, and acted like everything was normal. But inside, something had shifted. I started saving small amounts of money, coins, a few dollars here and there. I hid them inside an old book he never touched. It wasn't much, but it was mine. For the first time in a long time, something in that house belonged to me. He didn't notice at first. His control had become routine, and he was confident I'd never resist. But I was changing quietly. Every cruel word he spoke now made me colder toward him. Less attached, less afraid. Then came the night that pushed me past the edge. He came home late, angry about something that had happened at work. I could tell from the way he slammed the door. I stayed quiet, hoping to avoid conflict. But he wanted a fight. He accused me of being ungrateful, lazy, useless, all the words he knew could break me. This time, I didn't cry. I just looked at him. Maybe it was exhaustion, or maybe I had finally stopped caring. He noticed the difference. He shouted louder, demanding a reaction, but I gave him nothing. He stepped closer, and for a moment, I thought he might hit me. He didn't. He just whispered, "Don't ever forget, you're nothing without me." He walked away, but his words stayed. I sat there, shaking, but not from fear this time, from anger. For the first time, I felt it clearly. Anger, not sadness. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done. That night, I made a decision. I didn't know how or when, but I knew one thing, I would leave. It wouldn't be easy. It might take months. But I would do it. I had already reached my breaking point. There was nothing left to lose. The decision to leave didn't come with fireworks or tears. It came quietly, in the middle of an ordinary morning. I was making coffee when I realized I no longer felt anything for him, not love, not fear, not even hate. Just emptiness. That emptiness was freedom in disguise. He still spoke to me the same way, cold, commanding, controlling, but now, his words didn't hit me like they used to. They passed through me. It was like watching someone else's life play out, and I was just a silent observer waiting for my moment to walk away. I started planning. Not openly, not desperately, carefully. I had no family nearby, no job, no savings. But I had that small stash of money hidden in an old book. Every time I cleaned the house, I would slip a few dollars away. It wasn't much, but it gave me something priceless, hope. I began to take small steps. I reactivated my old email account and started applying for remote jobs, quietly, late at night when he was asleep. I didn't expect a miracle. I just needed a start. I also started talking to myself again, literally. I would stand in front of the mirror and say, "You can do this." It sounded ridiculous at first, but over time, those 3 words began to mean something. He didn't notice at first. He thought I was still the same woman, scared, obedient, silent. But he could sense something changing. He'd ask, "Why are you so quiet lately?" And I'd smile and say, "Just tired." Inside, I was anything but tired. I was alive again. One evening, while he was watching TV, I got an email. A small company in another state offered me part-time online work, writing, of all things. It wasn't much money, but it was something I earned myself. I couldn't stop smiling. I wanted to scream with joy, but I didn't. I just went to the bathroom, locked the door, and cried, not from pain, but from relief. I finally had something that was mine again. Days turned into weeks, and I began to find small pieces of myself. The way I laughed at little things, the way I hummed while cooking, habits I thought I had lost. I realized that he hadn't destroyed me completely. I was still there, somewhere under the silence. But the more confident I became, the more restless he got. He could feel his control slipping, and that made him furious. He started asking more questions, checking my phone again, accusing me of lying even when I hadn't said a word. One night he asked, "Do you think I don't notice you changing?" I didn't answer. He said, "Don't forget who made you who you are." I wanted to laugh. The man who destroyed me now claimed to have made me. I looked at him and said quietly, "You didn't make me. You broke me. And I'm fixing myself." That was the first time I had ever talked back to him. He froze for a second, surprised. Then he laughed, not the kind of laugh that comes from humor, but the cruel kind that says, "You'll never get away." But deep inside, I knew I already had. I didn't need to run that night. I just needed to keep building the strength to walk away when the moment came. And it came sooner than I expected. A few weeks later, we had another argument. This time, it was about nothing, as always. He yelled, I stayed quiet. Then he said, "You think you can survive without me? You can't even breathe without me." And for the first time, I realized he was wrong. I had already been breathing without him for months, quietly, secretly, strongly. That night, after he fell asleep, I packed a small bag. Just clothes, my phone, my hidden money, and one photo, the last reminder of the girl I used to be. I didn't leave right away. I waited. I needed one last thing, courage. It came the next morning. He left for work, slammed the door as usual. I stood there in the silence that followed. For years, that silence had terrified me. But now, it felt peaceful. I took a deep breath, picked up my bag, and walked out the door. No goodbye, no note, no explanation. Just freedom. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't care. I took the first bus I saw. The sun was rising, and for the first time in years, I felt it on my face without fear. I was finally awake. I didn't look back when I left the house. I couldn't. If I did, I might have lost my courage. I walked fast, almost running, holding my small bag tight against my chest. My heart was racing, but for the first time, it wasn't from fear. It was from freedom. I got on a bus going anywhere. I didn't even check the destination. I just needed distance, miles between me and the life I had just escaped. When the driver asked where I was headed, I said, as far as this takes me. He nodded, maybe because he'd seen the look before, the look of someone running not just from a place, but from a cage. The road stretched ahead like a promise. Every mile felt like another piece of my past falling away. But the freedom I felt came with a new kind of fear, survival. When the bus stopped in a small town, I got off. I didn't know its name. I didn't know anyone. All I had was $63, a phone with a cracked screen, and the hope that maybe I could start again. I found a cheap motel on the edge of the road, a place that smelled of cigarettes and loneliness. I paid for one night, counted the few bills left, and sat on the bed staring at the wall. I should have felt scared, but I didn't. I felt light. I felt alive. That night, I barely slept. My mind kept replaying everything, the fights, the humiliation, the way he used to throw words like knives. And for the first time, I didn't cry. I just breathed, slowly, deeply, like my lungs were finally mine again. The next morning, I woke up to silence. No yelling, no orders, no footsteps echoing down the hall. Just quiet. I sat by the window, looked at the sky, and whispered to myself, "You did it." But escape isn't a happy ending. It's just the beginning of a harder chapter. I started looking for work immediately. The online job I'd found before leaving helped a little, but it wasn't enough to survive. I walked around the small town, asking for any kind of job, diner, store, cleaning. Most people turned me away. Some gave me sympathetic looks but no help. One woman at a cafe noticed the exhaustion in my eyes. She asked if I was okay. I told her I just needed work. She hesitated, then said, "You can start washing dishes if you want. Pays low, but it's honest." I wanted to cry, not from sadness, but gratitude. I said yes instantly. That evening, I washed dishes for hours. My hands ached, the water was freezing, and I barely made enough for a meal. But it was mine. No one yelled at me. No one told me I owed them anything. That small paycheck was freedom printed on paper. I rented a tiny room above the cafe. The walls were thin, the bed creaked, and the window barely opened. But it was mine, my space, my world. Days turned into weeks, and I began to settle into a rhythm. Work, eat, sleep, repeat. It wasn't easy, but it was real. I didn't have to beg anyone for money. I didn't have to ask permission to breathe. Sometimes, late at night, I'd get scared again. What if he found me? What if he came looking? I'd imagine his car pulling up outside, his voice calling my name, the old fear crawling back. But every morning when I woke up to sunlight through that broken window, I reminded myself I was free. Then one afternoon, while cleaning tables, my phone buzzed. It was a number I didn't recognize. I froze. For a moment, I thought it was him. But it wasn't. It was an email notification from the online company. They wanted to increase my hours, more pay. I smiled so wide I couldn't stop. It felt like life was finally giving me something back. That night, I walked out to the small hill behind the cafe. The sky was full of stars, and the wind was cold against my face. I looked up and said softly, "I made it." It wasn't over. I knew there were still battles ahead, rebuilding, healing, forgiving myself for staying so long. But I was no longer trapped in his world. I was building my own. And as I stood there under the open sky, I realized something powerful. Freedom isn't running away from someone. It's finding yourself again. Months passed. Life didn't suddenly become easy, it became real. Every day was a mix of exhaustion and small victories. The cafe job turned into a full-time position. The online writing work grew too, and slowly, I began to save money. For the first time in years, I had goals, small ones at first. Buy better shoes, fix my phone, eat something fresh instead of instant noodles. But each small win felt like a piece of my broken self falling back into place. I started talking more to people at work. At first, I avoided questions. I didn't want anyone to know my story. But with time, I stopped hiding. One evening, sitting in the back of the cafe after closing, I told my boss, the kind woman who gave me the dishwashing job, the truth. She didn't pity me. She just said, "You're stronger than you think." It was the first time I believed it. I found an old community center nearby that offered free counseling. I went once a week. The first few sessions were hard. I didn't know how to talk about what had happened. I'd spent so long being silent that words felt heavy. But slowly, I learned to let them out. One day, the counselor said something I'll never forget. "You survived what was meant to destroy you. That's not weakness, that's power." Those words stuck with me. I began writing again, not for money, but for myself. Late at night, after work, I'd sit by the small window in my room and write everything I had never been able to say. I didn't care if anyone read it. It was therapy in words. Eventually, I started sharing small pieces of my story online, under a different name, of course. To my surprise, people responded. Some thanked me for helping them see they weren't alone. Others shared their own stories of escaping control and abuse. For the first time, my pain had purpose. I started to smile again, real smiles, not the fake ones I used to wear to keep peace. I went for walks. I learned to cook what I liked. I made friends. I began to feel at home in my own body. Then, one day, I saw him again, not in person, but online. His profile showed the same confident face, the same smile that once fooled me. I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel fear. I just felt nothing. He was part of another life, one I had already buried. That night, I deleted his number from my phone. Not because I needed to, but because I finally could. Years later, I moved to a small apartment in the city. It wasn't much, but it had sunlight, plants on the windowsill, and silence that felt peaceful, not empty. I stood there one morning, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. And I realized something profound. Freedom doesn't mean being unafraid. It means choosing yourself every single day, even when it's hard. I chose to live. I chose to heal. I chose to forgive myself. I never went back. I never looked back. The woman who once begged for tampon money was gone. The woman who stood in her place now earned her own, lived her own, and loved her own. And that, more than anything, was victory.